Hello YouTube, Mike O'Hannon here. Today I'm going to show you the Runick deck that I used to hit Duelist level max in the December 2022 Duelist Cup. The Runicks are a new theme that was just added to Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, and it's a strategy that at its core is a control strategy. It's a little bit like old Eldritch decks in that it can stop opponents from doing certain plays that their deck aims to do, but it's a lot more powerful. Even though it's a control deck, once you understand what the cards do and how to play it, it's actually pretty easy to play. In this video, I'm going to give an overview of the Runick strategy, talk about the specific deck that I used, and go through some of the matches that I had in the Duelist Cup. So here's the deck I used all the way through to get to Duelist level max and start in the second stage of the Duelist Cup. I'll put the deck list down in the description in case there are any cards that you don't recognize. I think the easiest way to start explaining the Runick strategy is to start with the focal card of the deck, which is Runick Fountain. This is the Runick field spell card that really gets the deck up and running. The deck really doesn't function if you don't have Runick Fountain. Fortunately, just about every single card in the deck searches for the Fountain. You can search for it with the one copy of Terraforming. Since Terraforming is limited to one, you can only use one copy. It's also searchable by the effect of Hugin the Runick Wings. When you summon Hugin, you can discard a card from your hand to search for the Fountain. Every single Runick quick play spell card in the deck has two effects, and one of those two effects allows you to special summon a fusion monster, a Runick monster, from your extra deck into the extra monster zone. So by using that effect to get Hugin, you can use Hugin's effect to search for the Fountain. With so many Runick spells in the deck, you have constant access to the Fountain. Once the Fountain is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, you can even use the effect of Geri the Runick Fangs to return it from your graveyard to your hand when you special summon Geri with the effect of one of the Runick cards. So it's highly searchable from the deck with the effect of Hugin, and you can recur it from your graveyard with the effect of Geri. So why is the Fountain so important? And the reason the Fountain is so important is actually partially because the Runick quick play spells in and of themselves are rather unspectacular. But the Fountain not only lets you play those quick play spells from your hand during your opponent's turn, making them harder for your opponent to predict and interact with, but also once per turn you can use the effect of Runick Fountain to send any number of Runick quick play spells from your graveyard back to the bottom of your deck after resolving a Runick spell card, and then draw that many cards up to 3. So Runick Fountain can actually draw you up to 3 cards per turn on both your own turn and your opponent's turn. It's also worth noting that this effect of Runick Fountain is not a hard once per turn. So if you play a Runick Fountain, use a Runick spell, a quick play spell, activate the Fountain to draw cards, and then play a second Fountain from your hand to replace the first Fountain, you can then use that second Fountain's effect to draw additional cards after using another Runick quick play spell. If you can, you'll ideally want to use the effect of the Runick Fountain to draw the full 3 cards per turn. That's not always practical. You won't always be able to, so even drawing any number of cards gradually puts you ahead of your opponent. Keep in mind that while the Fountain's on the field, since you could play your Runick quick play spells from your hand during your opponent's turn, even cards that you draw from your deck on your opponent's turn, quick play spells that you're otherwise unable to set, you'll be able to activate from your hand. Now let's talk about the Runick quick play spell cards that work with the Fountain. We have a large variety of effects that on their own are rather underwhelming, but when you consider the fact that the Fountain then allows you to draw a card, on average 1 card for every Runick spell that you play, these cards are basically costing you no cards because they're replacing themselves with a draw from your deck, which makes them incredibly powerful. In addition to their core effect, they also banish cards from the top of your opponent's deck, leading into a strategy where your ultimate goal is actually to deck out your opponent and make it so they can't draw a card in their draw phase. As a downside on each of the Runick Quick Play spell cards, you do need to give up your next battle phase, but that's generally inconsequential since the goal of the deck is to deck out the opponent, and battling does not actually play into that strategy. Going through them each one by one, Runick Tip banishes a card from the top of your opponent's deck and then searches for any other Runick card. It's not just limited to quick play spells, so you can even use it to get the Fountain if that's the method you want to use to search for the Fountain, rather than using a Runick quick play spell effect to special summon Hugin. Runick Flashing Fire lets you destroy a special summon monster on the field, banishing the top 2 cards of the deck. Runick Destruction lets you destroy an opponent's spell or trap card and banish the top 4 cards of your opponent's deck. Runick Freezing Curses lets you negate the effect of an opponent's effect monster and banish the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck. Runick Slumber lets you banish the top 3 cards of your deck after you choose a monster on the field and stop that monster from attacking for the turn, as well as protecting that monster from the next time it would be destroyed by battle or card effect. Slumber is particularly good because whereas most of the Runick quick play spell cards can only target an opponent's monster, Slumber can target your own monster and also banish cards from the top of your opponent's deck, so it makes progress toward the deck out strategy while also giving you an easy way to trigger the effect of the Runick Fountain. Similarly, Runick Smiting Storm is pretty easy to activate because it lets you banish cards your opponent from the top of your opponent's deck equal to the number of cards they control, which is fairly easy to activate. The problem with Smiting Storm is that it doesn't actually get you any sort of advantage in the duel in terms of affecting the game state and the opponent's field. Runick Dispelling is kind of an interesting card that's powerful when you use it, but not the easiest effect to use. When your opponent adds a card from their deck to their hand, except during the draw phase, you can use its effect to randomly discard a card from your opponent's hand and banish the top 2 cards of their deck. And then finally, Runick Golding Droplet is a tough one to use because it lets your opponent draw a card and banishes the top 4 cards of your opponent's deck. So it actually puts them a little bit ahead in terms of the game state. But when you consider that you'll be using the Runick Fountain to draw a card for yourself as well, you're not actually putting your opponent ahead, and it is nice having a Runick quick play spell that you can pretty much always activate. You can only use the effect of each Runick quick play spell card per turn, and as once per turn, and as I mentioned before, each of the quick play spell cards, in addition to the effects I just mentioned, is able to special summon a Runick Fusion monster from the extra deck to the extra monster zone. So those monsters are Hugin, the Runick Wings, which can search for Runick Fountain from the deck. Munin, the Runick Wings, which can search for continuous spells, Runick continuous spells, which I don't play any of, but I'll talk about anyway later in the video. And Geri, the Runick Fangs, which can return the Runick Fountain from your graveyard to your hand when you special summon it. In addition to these effects, the fusion monsters also have other powerful effects. Hugin is particularly strong because if another card you control would be destroyed by a card effect, you can banish the Hugin instead. And that is card or card. So even if multiple of your cards at once would be destroyed, you can banish the Hugin. This is really strong against something like Harpy's Feather Duster. If your opponent uses Harpy's Feather Duster against you, you can chain any of the Runick quick play spells to put Hugin in the extra monster zone, and then when the Harpy's Feather Duster would resolve, you can banish the Hugin to protect all of your spelling trap cards, including the Runick Fountain. For that reason, you should probably use 3 copies of Hugin in the extra deck. I only have 2 copies, so I'm only playing 2 copies, but you really do have the space for additional copies because this deck is not particularly reliant on the extra deck and does have the space for 3. If your Hugin is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, it actually does get returned to the extra deck, which is kind of helpful, but you can easily go through both of the Hugins with their banishing effect to protect your other cards, so it is wise to have a third copy if you have it in your collection. Another thing worth noting that doesn't come up a lot is that your Hugin can actually also protect your monsters from destruction. So I actually once had a Naturia Exterio on the field, summoned by Cyber Stein, and a Hugin on the field. My opponent tried to use Solemn Strike to negate my Exterio's effect and destroy it, and I was able to banish the Hugin to protect the Naturia Exterio when it would be destroyed. Munin the Runick Wings is pretty cool just because it gains you 1,000 life points during each end phase. That's yours and your opponent's. So it prolongs the game to help further your deck out strategy. In addition, when an opponent activates a card or effect that targets a Runick card you control or a set card you control, you can banish your Munin the Runick Wings to negate the activation and destroy that card. Just be careful because the temptation to gain 1,000 life points in every end phase with Munin will always be there, but if you stick him in the extra monster zone with the effect of one of your Runick quick play spells, you won't have that extra monster zone open to special summon Hugin with the effect of one of your Runick quick play spells. So you're then vulnerable to cards like Harpy's Feather Duster and Lightning Storm. I have gotten burned in that way several times before, so just be careful before summoning Munin and giving into that temptation of continuous life gain. Finally, Geri the Runick Fangs, even though his best purpose is just for returning the Runick Fountain from your graveyard to your hand without even discarding a card, he also can't be destroyed by card effects, which is nice, and if he's destroyed in battle, you can destroy a card on the field. This does come up once in a while, especially when you're trying to protect your life points by summoning monsters with the Runick quick play spells. That's the main strategy of the deck. I'm using trap cards. I'm using 2 copies of Skill Drain, 1 Rivalry, and 1 Gozen Match to help lock down what my opponent's able to do, and using cards like Upstart Goblin, Card of Demise, and Pot of Duality, plus 1 copy of Pot of Desires to help draw into the cards I need. I was using more copies of Pot of Desires, ended up cutting them, because you pretty much never want to draw more than 1. It's also not great in the Runick Mirror Match, which is becoming increasingly relevant as people are realizing how powerful Runick decks are. Be careful as well. Card of Demise and Pot of Duality, while you can use the 2 of those in the same turn, will cut you off from special summoning, so you won't be able to special summon Hugin from your extra deck to get the Fountain, or Geri to return it from your graveyard in the same turn that you activate either of these 2 cards. They also interact poorly with Cyber Stein in that if you use either of these 2 cards, you can't special summon a monster with Cyber Stein's effect. Keep that in mind, but these cards are extremely powerful, so even with the negative interactions in the deck, I do believe that they are worth running. Its card selection is extremely important because you want to get the deck up and running with the Fountain and the necessary Runick spell cards to continue a chain of cards that allow you to keep drawing cards with the Fountain and whittle away at your opponent's deck. And the Card of Demise's effect, which lets you just draw 3 cards from your deck while you play it with an empty hand, is absolutely incredible, especially considering that there's only a single monster in this deck, and anything you draw, you can set to your field, if not activate. One card I'm playing that I haven't seen a lot of people use is Messenger of Peace. I'm using a copy of it. I am a huge fan of this card. It can stop your opponent's huge monsters from attacking, keep you in the duel. It's just another way to lock down your opponent, and it's a card that you can protect with Hugin if your opponent tries to destroy it. Watch out also if you have Skill Drain face up. You won't be able to use Hugin's effect to replace the destruction of your cards with the banishment of your Hugin. So that's another negative interaction you have to just watch out for. There's actually quite a few interactions in this deck that just don't work with each other, but as long as you're mindful of them, you'll play around them and everything will be okay. I decided to try out the 1 copy of Cyber Stein just because I had a few in my collection from the Legacy packs, and I thought it was a really cool concept. because you can use your Cyber Stein to summon either the last warrior from another planet, which stops the summoning of monsters, or Naturia Exterio. What I like about summoning Exterio is if you do it against Runics, you just win. Look at this deck. 39 cards in this deck are spells and traps. Exterio will negate literally all of them. So you just win if you can summon Exterio off of Cyber Stein. You're kind of playing a lottery ticket in the deck, hoping to just draw it on your first turn and play it. Similarly, against other decks, there are many decks in the metagame that don't play a lot of spells and traps and are instead relying on monster cards. Against those decks, you can use Cyber Stein to summon the last warrior from another planet to stop your opponent from summoning monsters and basically prevent them from progressing the game state until you eventually run them out of cards with your runic effects. It's also helpful that you can often bait out your opponent's effect negation, cards like Infinite Impermanence, using Hugin. If you special summon it with the effect of a runic spell card, discard a card, and try to search for Fountain, a lot of times your opponent will try to stop it because they know how critical the Fountain is to this deck. If you follow up by summoning Cyber Stein and using its effect, once that effect resolves, you'll be able to land either Exterio or the last warrior from another planet on your field, and sometimes that in and of itself will win you the duel. The rest of the cards in the extra deck, in all honesty, are kind of just filler. I'm using Fortress Dragon and Megafleet Dragon because they can break an opponent's field if I'm playing against the Cyber Dragon deck, but realistically, they're just filler. They've never come up in my entire climb to Duelist level max. Gravity Controller I've gone for, usually subsequently regretting it. It's easy to summon because you can link away the runic monster in your extra monster zone, but generally speaking, you're not going for it because the runic monster is more valuable to you. The only runic card in this in Master Duel that this deck actually does not play is Runick Allure, which is actually a continuous spell card that banishes the top card of your opponent's deck every time a quick play spell card is activated. This card will interact with Munin as well as Geri, because Geri can return it from the graveyard to your hand, and Munin can actually search for it from the deck. It has no immediate impact on the game, and actually I've never see any play in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game. However, Runick Allure is a lot better on Master Duel because of the strength and popularity of Runick on there. And Runick Allure is actually pretty good in the mirror match because it'll also trigger when your opponent uses a quick play spell. So I did not use it at any point, but I did consider using it. And I can understand using it, so try out a copy if you want to, since it's searchable, just for that mirror match. Except other than in that mirror match, I don't think the one extra banish from each quick play spell is significant enough to justify it, but the popularity of the Runick deck in Master Duel definitely makes it worth considering, since you will have some matches against other Runick decks. Once you start using the deck, you'll really understand how powerful it is, because the cards in and of themselves don't seem so powerful, because they have fairly simple effects that are outclassed by a lot of other cards. But once you combine them with the Fountain and see how easily you just replace them with new draws from your deck as you activate them, you'll quickly realize that you're completely outcarding your opponent, putting your opponent in a position where they pretty much can't do anything. Just using Freezing Curses to negate a monster effect, which is a card expended by your opponent, or Runick Destruction to destroy a spell or trap card, which is another card expended by your opponent, while replacing them with the effect of Runick Fountain after they're sent to the graveyard, is really powerful. And I feel like you might sometimes need to actually play the deck to really get a feel for how powerful it is. If you thought this guide was helpful, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions about the deck, feel free to put them in the comments section, and I will do my best to reply to each question. Now I'll go through some of my recorded matches from the Duelist Cup and talk about some of the plays and the strategies behind the deck. First off, I do want to note that although this is one of the most powerful decks in Master Duel right now, it is a very slow deck to play, and unless your opponents are quickly conceding, you're probably going to find that each duel is taking very long, because winning by deck out is not the fastest way to win, so there may be more time-efficient ways to get to the second stage of the Duelist Cup. That said, the Runick deck is way more powerful in Master Duel than it is in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game, in part because there is no side deck, and matches are essentially best of one. It's only one game, and Runick decks are vulnerable to a lot of silver bullet cards like Cosmic Cyclone that a lot of players are not using in their main deck. So I do think it's one of the most powerful decks, and I think it is a great choice in the second stage of the Duelist Cup. But if you're looking to get to that second stage as quickly as possible, it may not be the most efficient deck. So we'll get started on the first recorded match. I think it's important to see how the deck plays so that you can really understand how it accumulates card advantage to get ahead in the duel at a very slow pace. In this match, it is a Runick mirror match. In matches like these, it's really all about controlling the Runick Fountain. If one player is cut off from the fountain, it becomes very difficult for that player to win. It's also important in this matchup to very carefully calculate how you can banish the remaining cards in your opponent's deck once they are low on cards, because a lot of times it'll come down to the players having very slow grindy games where there are very few cards left in the deck. Once both players are low on cards, you want to be able to banish all of them at once. So if they have 7 cards, for example, you're gonna use a card that banishes 4 and a card that banishes 3, so that they lose when they draw. So in this matchup, my opponent is playing Runick Allure, which is actually really good for this matchup only. We're both able to land the Runick Fountain. This is a bit of a tough matchup to play. You really want to get lucky on the cards you banish, and a lot of it really does come down to whether or not you can control their Runick Slumber. So because he put Geri in the extra monster zone, I am not motivated to get rid of it, so I can continue cutting him off from being able to special summon additional cards like Geri and Hugin from the extra deck to be able to access Fountain. I am able to use Runick Destruction to take out the Fountain, and I subsequently do get rid of the Runick Allure, which I fear will gradually allow him to deplete my deck at a faster pace than I can. Now that his Runick Fountain is gone, however, I have the clear edge, even though he has 16 cards in his deck and I have 6 in mine, because I'm not going to run out of cards in my hand, and I don't have a monster on my field either. You can note that a lot of the Runick Quick Play spells require your opponent to have a monster on the field in order to activate them. So I'm actually at an advantage by not having it. So he uses the Runick Tip, and I use Runick Destruction to get rid of the Runick Allure to save myself from a card in the deck. I ultimately do special summon Hugin when he tries to destroy my Fountain with Destruction. That allows me to protect the Fountain. It also lets me trigger the Fountain to draw additional cards with its effect. He does use Card of Demise, but he is completely cut off from being able to use Runick Fountain, and he only has 2 cards in his deck. Flashing Fire will banish both of those cards, which will win me the duel once he draws for his turn. Keep in mind that if your opponent has fewer cards in their deck than your Runick card would banish, you're not able to activate it with that effect. I make him draw the last card with 1 day apiece, and that's the duel. It's hard for the deck to function without Runick Fountain, and if you keep that in mind in a lot of matchups, it'll guide your plays so that you can win. This is kind of a tough hand to play because while I have 4 Runick cards, I don't have the Fountain, and if I special summon with one of them, then I won't be able to use Card of Demise. But ultimately, I decide the 3 free cards are too good to pass up. So I use set 4, use Card of Demise, then I activate the Fountain. I set Runick Tip. I choose to discard the Pot of Desires because virtually anything I draw I would not be able to use effectively. So I'd rather just discard it in the end phase than banish the top 10 cards of my deck and then discard 2 cards in the end phase. He uses Cosmic Cyclone, surprisingly, on my face-down Runick Tip, which I chain. He doesn't go for the Fountain, which is weird. And after using Runick Tip, I learned that he's playing Floowandereeze. So he uses the map and then activates Pot of Prosperity. Unfortunately, Runick Flashing Fire does literally virtually nothing in this matchup. It can still be used to special summon a card from your extra deck, but the deck doesn't special summon any monsters. So he adds Harpy's Feather Duster to his hand with Prosperity, or maybe it was Duality, allowing me to use Runick Dispelling. Then he uses Feather Duster, and I chain Golden Droplet in order to special summon Hugin, and then when the Feather Duster resolves, I can use Hugin's effect to replace the destruction of my cards with the banishment of Hugin. Extremely powerful play, great protection against Feather Duster. Now he has no copies of Floowandereeze monsters to summon. In the end phase, I use the Flashing Fire that otherwise does nothing to summon the Munin, gain some life points, and then being on the field allows me to slumber. This helps me load up my graveyard with cards that I can return to the deck with Runick Fountain. So on my next turn, I use it again. I use another Slumber, use the Fountain to draw 3 cards, and I follow up Pot of Duality to add Runick Tip to my hand. Tip gets Destruction because I do want to get rid of his map. Banish the top 4 cards of his deck. That leaves him with 18. Set my hand, followed by Card of Demise. Flip Messenger of Peace, and I have a Runick Destruction set. I try to gain 1,000 life in the end phase. He uses Infinite Impermanence, and I actually choose to banish my Runick Wings so that I can in fact gain those 1,000 life points, but more importantly, it gets it out of the extra monster zone, so I'm free to activate another Runick spell like the Flashing Fire, which otherwise does nothing. It being in the graveyard allows me to use Runick Fountain to return it to the deck to turn it into cards that I'm able to draw. In this game, I open up with 3 Runick Tip, which is clearly one of the best cards in the deck. So you can search for any Runick card. You don't typically want to draw all of them at once, since you can only activate 1 of each Runick card per turn, other than the Fountain. My opponent's playing Sword Soul and gets a fairly standard opening. Instead of Baron de Fleur, he does go for Sword Soul Supreme, Sovereign Cheng. The Grandmaster will cut me off probably from playing Hugin's effect to get a Fountain, but fortunately I do already have a Fountain. I do use Freezing Curses on the Cheng so that he can't banish my cards by banishing one of his own cards, or from me activating a Runick card that banishes his cards. With its effect negated, I'm able to destroy it with Flashing Fire, and by playing the Fountain first, I can draw 3 cards. I set for Card of Demise to draw 2 cards, and then after using Slumber to just get 3 cards back off his deck, I flip the Gozen Match and pass. He uses Feather Duster, to which I chain the Freezing Curses to summon Hugin. Once again, when my back rows would be destroyed, Hugin protects them by banishing itself. Keep in mind that Hugin gets summoned in the middle of the chain, so it's really hard for an opponent to stop. They can't destroy Hugin after it hits the field to prevent it from protecting your cards. They basically have to stop the card that summons the Hugin, and then hope you don't have another copy. So Feather Duster is not nearly as good as you might expect against a Runick deck. From there, I'm able to just stave off his attacks one by one, destroy his cards one by one, and quickly get ahead with Runick Fountain. This next opponent is named Playmaker. Undoubtedly after the Vrain's protagonist. In this game I open with Terraforming, which is as good as opening with the Fountain, and I use Upstart Goblins to thin my deck and draw cards. Use Pot of Duality next. I don't need to special summon since I opened with the Fountain without using Hugin. I activate the Fountain. Next I use the Tip. I have no other way to play any Runick quick play spells this turn since I can't get a monster on the field, so I do use the Fountain to draw a card, and I just pass my turn. I could play all 5 of the cards in my hand during my opponent's turn. So after he special summons an Emancipator, I destroy it with Flashing Fire. He special summons another one, and when he uses its effect, I negate it with Freezing Curses. He synchro summons and then uses the effect to special summon Quackimera Guardian, which doesn't do much against me, and then he summons the Anaconda. On its summon, I use Slumber to try to draw 3 cards, hoping for something to help. Well, I'm not sure there actually was anything to help with. And he uses his Anaconda to summon the Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer. He uses its effect to try to get rid of the Fountain. I use Hugin to protect it, so he doesn't destroy any cards. I then stop an attack by using another Runick quick play spell. Once again, when he tries to use the effect of Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer, I'm able to protect it with Hugin. This is why I would play 3 Hugin if I had the 3. Just like that, I'm down 2 Hugins. And if I couldn't destroy the Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer quickly, it would be problematic because it would once again threaten the Fountain. I wouldn't have a Hugin to protect it. With it on the field, I'm able to use Slumber, Freezing Curses, and other cards to help banish cards from his deck, bring him down to 17 cards. He draws Nibiru, uses Dasher's effect to try to summon it. I flip Rivalry of Warlords. Since the Nibiru is a rock and Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer is a warrior, he can't summon it. I continue getting rid of his cards. I use the Fountain to keep drawing cards, and he ultimately concedes with so few cards left in his deck. So even with the Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer on the field, because playing the Runick quick play spells really don't expend any resources, since they just replace themselves with a new draw from the deck with the Fountain, you can really just keep stopping its effect by using 1 card each time and still not fall behind, which is kind of crazy to think about. I found that as I progressed in the tournament to higher duelist levels, the wins actually came quicker because opponents were willing to concede more readily when they've acknowledged that they were going to lose. Whereas at the lower ranks, players had more trouble, I guess, realizing that their defeat was inevitable. So in this game, I summon Hugin using the effect of Runick Dispelling. I try to use its effect and then lose out to the Infinite Impermanence. With Imperm out of the way, I'm free to normal summon Cyber Stein, and I use it to summon Exterio. I don't know if this was a heavy spell and trap deck, but the Cyber Stein here is basically a lottery ticket. If he's running Runicks or something else that is extremely heavy on spells and traps, he just automatically loses, and that's what happened. He conceded. This game my opponent's main decking anti-spell fragrance and takes it with Pot of Duality without knowing what I'm playing. Clearly problematic for me, especially since I didn't open up with Runick Destruction to destroy it. I do use Flashing Fire to try to summon Hugin in response to the anti-spell fragrance, and he flips Macrocosmos. So that even my Flashing Fire and the Freezing Curses are both banished. I set all of my spells since I can't activate any of them until next turn with anti-spell fragrance up. And then on my next turn, I'm able to use Duality. And with none of the cards I saw helpful, I use... I add another Duality to my hand. I do use Card of Demise to dig through my deck, but I'm forced to discard 2 cards in the end phase. I think I forgot to flip Messenger Piece here, but ultimately it didn't really matter. Once he summons a Fiend, I flip Rivalry so that he's locked into only Fiends. And I also use the Freezing Curses, which is relatively effective here since it banishes 3 cards from his deck and also negates the Eater of Millions so that my Hugin can't be destroyed in battle. I use Duality to get the Runick Tip and then flip Messenger Piece. When he enters his battle phase, I use Flashing Fire to get rid of the Eater of Millions. Messenger Piece only costs 100 life points to keep in the end phase, which is incredible. I use Destruction to try to get rid of Macrocosmos, because even with Anti-Spell Fragrance face up, I can at least still use my cards a turn delayed, but with Macrocosmos up, I will never be able to use the Fountain, because I need to return the Runick Quick Play spells from my graveyard to my deck to use it. Unfortunately, he flips a second Macrocosmos, so there's no end in sight for the banishment of my cards. Until I use another Runick Destruction. And that one does get rid of the second Macrocosmos. This Anti-Spell Fragrance is still there, but you can really play around that. He summons Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. I don't entirely understand why. He's setting up, I guess, to use their effects from the field later on, but right now he has 0 attack points threatening me. He does use Feather Duster. Like I said, not the most effective card against this deck, because you can just chain one of the quick play spells to summon Hugin and protect it. I try to use the Fountain, and he uses one of the Ghost Ogres to destroy it. I have another Fountain, but I will have to set it before I'm able to do it. Before I'm able to get it face up. I set Skill Drain, which is generally a good card to have, which is why it's the only continuous trap I play 2 of. I flip Slumber. He uses Artifact Lancia to prevent banishing of cards, which basically hard counters it. At this point, he is down to 9 cards in his deck. And then we just start draw passing. You have to be really patient if you're using this deck, because you're planning to win by deck out. With Duster gone, I feel confident using Dispelling to summon the Munin to start gaining life points, which I hope pulls me further ahead. The Munin interacts well with Messenger Piece too, since you're gaining more life points than you pay, even if you're already low on life points once you get both of them out. He's not doing much, I'm not doing much, but ultimately that's a good thing if we're both not doing much, because I'm planning to win by deck out. He eventually tries to use the Ghost Ogre, or does successfully use the Ghost Ogre to destroy my Munin. He flip summons 2 Grand Magus, normal summons a third, and then uses Cosmic Cyclone on the Messenger Piece so they could attack. But I flip Skill Drain, dropping all their attack points to 0, and he concedes. Unfortunately, I use Pot of Duality and reveal Cyber Stein, but I can't special summon the turn I use Pot of Duality, so I don't take the Cyber Stein. It's really an annoying negative interaction between the cards that you kind of just gotta suck it up and play around it. It's gonna come up from time to time and it's gonna annoy you, but a lot of powerful cards in the deck that you're playing, and things don't always work out the way you want them to. After using Card of Demise, you always want to set as many cards as possible because you discard your hand in the end phase. So I use Geri's effect, return the Fountain to my hand. Fountain's effect to draw 3 cards, or 2 cards rather. Overall, a rough start for me because I only have 2 Runick quick play spells, and they don't do much, but I do fortunately draw into Slumber, which can stave off 3,000 attack by preventing the Mirror Jade from attacking me. I don't have much going on for me, but I do have a bunch of cards that can draw, and I have the Card of Demise I can draw, and I have the Pot of Duality, which can search the top 3 cards. So I should get something good this turn. I'm also using the Fountain to draw 3 cards after using the Flashing Fire. Getting Rivalry is not that important, I guess, but with Fallen Valbaz being a dragon, it's not irrelevant. Skill Drain, on the other hand, is a lot better. But he does summon Long Yuan, which Skill Drain doesn't actually stop. I flip it anyway so that anything he synchro summons into would have its effect negated, including a Baron de Fleur. He goes for Grandmaster Qishao, which gets negated by Skill Drain. He goes for Baxia, negated by Skill Drain. And he switches everything into attack position. This is where you can start to see the resilience of the deck. He has 4 monsters all able to attack. So the first one attacks, and I special summon Munin. Then I use Slumber to stop another monster from attacking. And then I can just take the hits from the last 2 monsters and drop down to 2,600 life points. I draw another Flashing Fire, this time getting rid of the Qishao, and that allows me to draw 3 additional cards. I use Pot of Duality next, getting the golden Droplet, and I activate Messenger of Peace, stopping him from attacking with 2 of his 3 monsters. I can't use Cyber Stein's effect since I only have 2,600 life points, so I just set it to protect my life points. I use Freezing Curses to summon Munin, and then the Fountain to draw additional cards. I get Flashing Fire, which I use to destroy Baxia, which banishes more cards from his deck. He's down to 26 cards in his deck. Unless you're playing as Runick, you don't really need to worry about your own deck count, because generally speaking, you'll eventually get to a pace at which you're banishing so many cards from their deck that they will run out of cards before you. I opened up with 5 Runick spells, quick play spells. It's honestly not bad. Any one of them can get you the Fountain, and then you can just start drawing cards. That's why the deck plays every single Runick spell other than Runick Lore. So I negate the effect of Hugin with Freezing Curses, then I destroy the Fountain with Runick Destruction. That cuts him off from using Runick play spells from his hand, which allows me to play whatever I want. So I ultimately destroy the Hugin using Flashing Fire, which is the 3rd Runick quick play spell in my deck, and then I am able to play another Fountain, use Tip. Tip gets, I get a 2nd Destruction since it's so valuable in this matchup, and because I have the skill drain for negating Hugin. I set 1 Destruction, keep 1 in my hand. When I have duplicates, I generally do like to keep both of them. Or keep both of them separated, 1 in hand, 1 on field, with the Fountain active. He goes for Geri to try to return the fountain to his hand, and I use from the graveyard. I use skill drain to negate it. Because he was able to destroy my fountain, I'm now in a position without fountain as well, and I have no way to summon it. Summon a Hugin to search for another one, or a Geri to get it back, because of the fact that I have Hugin in the extra monster zone. But I can protect his card with Slumber, target it with Slumber, bash some cards, and I do draw a tip, which I use to get the fountain, which gets me going again. I now have 9 cards to his 2 cards, although we have similar number of cards in our decks, with him at 16, me at 6, or I was at 17, now 16. I'm overwhelmingly ahead because I have so many more cards and the recursion from Runick Fountain. And that's the goal of the deck. You want to gradually get ahead until you're suddenly so far ahead that your opponent is either going to concede, or if they're really stubborn, keep playing until they deck out and lose. So my opponent goes first, unfortunately, but I open with Cyber Stein. So I really wish I was first. He's using Floowandereeze. Not a bad matchup for this deck by any means. Again, because he's first, I couldn't play Fountain or set any cards, so he can really do whatever he wants. He keeps going. Luckily, I do have Messenger of Peace. Really is an incredible card in this deck that I see a lot of players forego. I activate the Fountain. He plays Floowandereeze in the Dreaming Town. That gets him started on a chain of normal summons. Looks like it's going to end with an Apex Avian summoned. I use Freezing Curses on the Apex Avian so that he can't use its effect. Summon Cyber Stein to the field. He uses Max C. I summon Last Warrior from another planet. So now we can't summon monsters, which is a problem for a Floowandereeze deck. And I have Messenger of Peace, so he can't attack the Last Warrior from another planet. I do use the effect of Fountain in a later turn to try to draw cards, but he negates the activation with the Apex Avian. Because of the Last Warrior from another planet, though, he's not able to resummon that Apex Avian. I use Runick Destruction on the back row card, just because the Floowandereeze and the Magnificent Map is irrelevant, as long as neither player can normal summon. Or special summon. I draw Skill Drain, but I don't even bother setting it. I'm low on life points, and I don't want to negate the effect of my Last Warrior from another planet, which is the only thing keeping me in the game. I do set the Gozen Match, though, because if the Last Warrior leaves, it can come in handy since the Floowandereeze attributes are all over the place. I use Freezing Curses, really just to banish 3 more cards from my opponent's deck and allow me to use the Fountain. Pot of Duality is among the 3 cards. He only has 8 cards in his deck, so I go for the Droplet. I use Slumber, targeting the Stein, so he's down to 5 cards in deck. And then Golden Droplet makes him draw 1 and banish the top 4, which brings him to 0 cards in his deck. So that's the Runick deck I used to get to Duelist level max in the December 2022 Duelist Cup. It's not the most exciting deck or the most innovative, but it is definitely one of the top competitive decks. It's not that hard to use. It can be fun to play if you enjoy heavy control decks, and there are a lot of different variants that you can build to play the deck. So if that's your style, if you like the slower decks that control the duel, I would recommend this deck. And if you like playing a card that once in a while you can drop to automatically win the duel, I think the inclusion of Cyber Stein is pretty cool. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to my channel. I would really appreciate it. Thank you.